All right, we're ready to dive into animation and cursor effects. And this is one of my favorite sections because this is really where you can make your videos stand out. You can take some of the annotations that we learned about in the last section and you can animate them in a lot of ways that look like something you would do with other tools like After Effects. And you can do that simply inside of Camtasia a lot easier as well. So we're going to dive into, first of all, the basics of animations. And it's important to understand some concepts of what animations are, how animations change, and how you adapt and adjust the animations as well. So we'll dive into that. And then once you understand the basics of animations, we'll talk about out-of-the-box animations and some of the things that Camtasia already does for you that you can quickly just apply to your videos or to your annotations. We'll then talk about how to zoom in and pan, which you have been seeing already up to this point when I zoom into portions of the screen to help you focus on different parts of the screen, and then I move over to different portions of the screen as well, and then I zoom out, which helps the viewer focus on different portions of your screen and how to move over, and all of that is done through animations. Then we're going to talk about something called behaviors, which behaviors adds on even more complex animations. And it does some cool things with text. And so I use behaviors all the time when I'm animating text. I'll talk about how to do that, how to add on the entrance and the exit animations, and then even have animations in between as well. And then just like with the editing shortcuts, I want to talk about some shortcuts that you'll use when you're adding on animations and how much time those will actually save you when you're editing your videos. And then we'll dive into some cursor effects, how you can actually adjust the size of your cursor, how you can change the color of your cursor as well. We'll then talk about how to even change the path of the cursor, which is the most powerful thing, in my opinion, that Camtasia allows you to do compared to other screen recording tools. You can change the complete path of your cursor, your mouse, as you start to move it around. If you wiggle it around a lot, or if it did something it wasn't supposed to, you can edit that right inside of Camtasia. And then finally, we'll talk about transitions, how to animate from one recording to another recording, or from one portion of your video to another portion of your video, and how to adjust the length of those transitions and everything you need to know with those transitions. So this is a big section as well, but it's really going to take you to the next level in your video editing. So it's an important section. Let's go ahead and dive in. Animation can enhance our videos and allow us to create some cool effects. Let's explore some of the basic animations we can do right within Camtasia. The basics of animations are changing properties from a starting point in a timeline to an ending point. So you have a point A, the first circle, which is the start of the animation, and point B, the second circle, which is the end of the animation. To make a change occur from point A to point B, we will adjust the properties. Let's say we have point A, and the X value, which represents the location of the annotation, is 100. But by the time we reach point B, we want it to move to 400. These are critical points in our animation. We know that we are currently at 100x, and we want to move to 400x by another point of our animation. An animation incrementally increases the X value from 100 by negligible amounts until we reach 400. This gives us the animation, and now we see it move along the X value until we get to point B. Camtasia makes animations easy for us. So let's make sure we have an annotation on the timeline. Let's zoom in on our timeline to ensure the annotation is stretched out to at least 10 seconds. Move your playhead in a little bit. We want to stay paused for a few seconds before the animation starts. Now let's go to the Animations tab. On Windows, you will see a split into two additional tabs. One is labeled Zoom and Pan, and the other is just Animations. We will return to Zoom and Pan in this module, but not yet. Let's explore the Animations tab for now. You will see the Animations tab right away when you click on Animations on the Mac version. We have some out-of-the-box animations like Scale Up, Smart Focus, Motion Path, Restore, and more. Let's build a custom animation for now to get to know the basics. I'm going to click and drag on a custom animation. Once you drag an animation to the object, you'll notice an arrow placed on the object with a circle at the beginning of the arrow and a circle at the end.
These circles are point A and B. The length of the arrow is adjustable. We can click on one of the circles and then click and stretch out the time it takes to animate from point A to point B. The longer the arrow, the longer the animation. The shorter the arrow, the shorter the animation. So far, nothing changes when we move our playhead back and forth. It has not changed because we have kept all of our properties the same from point A to point B. We need to change one of them. I'm going to click on point B, the second circle. Clicking up the circle will bring up properties that we can change or adjust by the time it gets to this point. Keep in mind that we do not need to click on the circle. You can just move your playhead before or after the points to do the same thing. I find it easier just to click on the circle. Let's go into our visual properties and update the X value manually, or you can also drag the item on the canvas. Now let's move our playhead back and forth across the arrow. It is now animating from the properties set up at point A to the new properties we changed at point B. That's how easy it is to animate. We can do this with any visual properties like X, Y, opacity, scale, rotation, skew, or annotation properties like color, outline, or outline thickness. Even though we changed the second circle first, we could approach this by changing the properties on the first circle instead. I'm going to add another annotation. I will position this in the spot that I want it to end. So let's say this is where I want the object to end. Now let's add on a custom animation. Click and drag on the custom animation. Instead of changing the properties on the second circle, let's go to point A and change the properties on the first one. I will click on point A and we'll see the playhead go to the start of the animation. Now I'm going to move this object off the canvas. Now move the playhead back and forth and you'll see the object start off the canvas and then animate into the canvas. You can do the same thing with opacity to have something start out invisible and then become visible. We're just scratching the surface of animations, but we know how to add on a custom animation now and adjust properties from the first point to the second point. We can quickly use some out-of-the-box animations instead of having to adjust all the properties ourselves. Let's explore what some of those do in the next video. Now that we know what happens during an animation, let's explore some of the animations that come out of the box and see what happens to them. Make sure that you're still within the Animations tab, and I'm going to delete my previous animations but keep my annotations. The first out-of-the-box animation that I want to add is the no opacity. I'm going to click and drag this one onto my annotation. You can see that it adds an arrow, just like my custom one. As I drag the playhead back and forth, you'll see that this fades out my object. If you want something to fade out, you can quickly add this animation instead of adjusting the properties on a custom animation. You can use the full opacity animation if you want something to fade in. Notice that the opacity stays the same with this one as I move my playhead back and forth. To have it fade in, I need to either click on the first circle or move my playhead before the circle and bring the opacity down. If I move my playhead over the animation, it now fades in. So say that I want to quickly take this back to what it was before. I can use the restore to turn it back to what it was before. I'm going to click and drag this after my scale. Make sure that it is down the timeline some. Now I'm going to move my playhead back and forth, and you can see that it animates the scale to its original value. The next animation is scale to fit. This will scale whatever I add to full height or width of the canvas. This is a quick way to either scale something up, or if I scaled something like a screen recording, to zoom into one portion of the screen, this is a quick and easy way to bring it back to the full screen. The next animations work well with screen recordings. You can use this to move content off to the side or give us some room to animate in some bullet points, which is to tilt it right or left. I'm going to add this to the screen recording that I have. I will click and drag that onto the canvas. It animates off to the left or right and angles the screen recording, giving us some room to add some text. The next pair of animations is scale up and scale down animations. Those work well with screen recordings. It adjusts the scale to whatever object we add to it. You can see that the scale up will increase the object by 25%. We can go beyond that if needed. Scale down will take it back to where it was before. We have 2 more animations to explore. We will cover the motion path in another video, but let's add on a smart focus to one of our screen recordings. You can see that it adds several zoom ins, zoom outs, and pans to our screen. It is not perfect, but it may be a good starting point. It tries to figure out the zooms and pans you may want to keep your viewer focused on the important parts of your video. The zoom and pan section also helps us do something similar. I will do a Ctrl-Z to go back before I add it on the smart focus. Let's talk about zoom and pan next. One of the most common things that you do when working with screen recordings is zoom in and pan around the screen. Doing this helps focus the viewer's attention on what you are talking about and allows viewers to see better on smaller devices. We have different workflows depending on if you're working with Windows or Mac, and I'm going to walk through each of those workflows in this video. I will first cover how to do this on a Windows machine. You will see a zoom and pan section within the Animations tab. Let's make sure that we have a screen recording to work with. If you do not have one on your timeline, create a new one or drag one onto the timeline. Now let's move the playhead to the point that we want to end our first zoom. The zoom and pan tool gives us an easy way to zoom up and move around our screen rather than going into all the properties and always adding on custom animations. Now we can use the slider in the zoom and pan tool to adjust how much we want to zoom in. Notice that it adds an animation with the second circle having the new properties that we just adjusted. You can also pan the visible part of the screen. Let's take this highlight in the pan tool and move it around our screen recording. You can see that the canvas updates automatically. We don't want to zoom in for the next animation, but we want to pan to a different part of the screen. Move our playhead to the point you want to move, and then adjust the window in the zoom and pan tool. Adjusting the window will create a new animation to our timeline. If we want to zoom back to its original size, we can move our playhead down the timeline and then click on Actual Size or Scale to Fit. Which one to use could depend on how you changed your canvas size from the original recording. That has now created an animation taking us back to the original size. Now let's see what we can do on a Mac. Now you can see within the Mac app, we do not have a zoom and pan tab under the Animations tab, but we can access it by going into Edit and selecting the zoom and pan tool, which works similarly to the Windows steps, or we can just manually zoom and pan. To manually zoom and pan, make sure that you have a screen recording you can work with. Move the playhead to the first part that you want to zoom in on. You can either add a custom animation or scale up animation. Let's just do custom for now. At the second point, point B, let's go to our properties and adjust the scale. You can see our screen recording is now zooming in. If you want to pan the screen recording, manually adjust the position properties or click and drag the recording to the part that you want to focus on. And that's it. Now to return the screen recording to its original size, let's add a scale to fit animation further down the timeline, and now it's returned to fit the canvas size. You can also manually adjust the scale with a custom animation. You may also notice a reset button next to some properties that will change properties back to their default state. The reset button may or may not work depending on your original screen resolution and the size of your canvas. Which option you choose could depend on your preferences. You may like the zoom and pan tool, or you may want to do it all custom. We have been adjusting a lot of properties, but there are some additional out-of-the-box animations called behaviors. Let's explore those next. We have talked about the animation section, which gives us a lot of control over how our objects animate, but we have a whole other section that allows us to animate objects on our canvas, which is our behaviors. Behaviors gives us other types of animations than just standard animations. We have things like explode, drift, reveal, pop up, and more. Behaviors get applied differently than animations do. Animations add an arrow, and you can see the animation start and ending points. With behavior, we can still control when a behavior starts and stops. but it is in a slightly different way. Let's add a behavior to an annotation to see. I'm going to add a simple annotation to my canvas. Now let's add a drifting behavior. We do not have a visible arrow allowing us to see when the animation starts and stops on the timeline. We do, however, see some properties on the right-hand side. We will come back to the properties in a second. To see the behavior on the timeline, we have an arrow that brings up a tray here on our media. When a tray comes up, we see the behavior that was added. The nice thing about behaviors is we can stack on several behaviors simultaneously. Adding several behaviors may not produce the desired results, but it is possible to add on several behaviors. Notice the behavior stretches out to the entire length of the clip. You may want the behavior to take up only a part of the length. To do this, you can cut out a portion of the clip where you want the behavior to occur, and delete the behavior from the clips you don't want to animate in that way. Each behavior contains an animation during and end animation. You can click on the three tabs to see how to adjust the animation for the clip's beginning, middle, and end. Let's start with the end section. With the end section, we can adjust the style. Depending on the style or animation you choose, different options will appear. For example, let's select Bounce In. Bounce In allows me to adjust the movement and change the animation's easing. Easing is how fast or slow the animation either starts or stops. You can also select Linear if you don't want there to be any speed variation. It will then stay at the same speed the entire time. Now, linear may not look realistic, so that is where adding something like bounce or spring may give us a little bit more flair to our animation. With bounce selected, you can choose the bounce direction and how the bounce happens. So far, we've just adjusted the start of our animation. Let's click on During next. During is the type of animation that will loop over and over until the animation is about to end. We have access to things like pulsate if we want to look like a heartbeat, drift if we want to keep it moving, or more. You also can select None to have it not do anything during the in-between parts. Finally, we can adjust how we want our object to animate out. Each option has its own properties and effects. I suggest playing around with the various options to see what you can do with the style, speed, movement, and more. Behaviors work best with text animations, so let's add some text annotation to our canvas. Now go in and add a behavior. In the In section, we have a new option for the type. Notice that we can apply this animation to the entire text box all at once, or we can select text and see how many different options. We can have it ripple in letter by letter, have the letters come in randomly, and more. I most commonly use behaviors for text for this reason. So that is how you add on a behavior and adjust some of the in, during, and out settings to get various effects. Next, let's talk about shortcuts and motion paths to get even quicker with our animations. Let's check out some additional handy behaviors that were added to the application. The first one is Tremble, and the second one is Wiggle. These behaviors allow us to call attention to objects on the canvas. For example, you may start wiggling an arrow to draw the viewer's attention to an urgent matter. Now let's see how this is done. I have a simple recording on my canvas. Let's go in and add an arrow from our annotations. Let's say we have something extremely important on our screen recording that we want to really grab the viewer's attention. Let's point our arrow at the part of the screen that we're calling out. I will add more thickness to the arrow and turn it red. With those visuals now in place, make sure the arrow shows up at the right time. You may need to adjust the timing along the timeline. Now let's go into behaviors. Scroll to the bottom and you'll see the new behaviors. Let's start out with the wiggle behavior. Click and drag the behavior to the arrow. Let's expand the effects tray to see the wiggle. We cannot adjust the timing on this, so if needed, you can split up the clip and only apply it to the part that you want. But for now, this is okay. Go into the properties and let's explore what we can do. If you click on In, you will see that no behavior has been added to the object coming in. Or if you click on Out, you'll see the same thing. The key with wiggle and tremble is that this happens throughout the clip to which it's applied. So let's go into the during section. Within the during section, we have many adjustments we can make. We can adjust how frequently this wiggles. Frequency will make the wiggle go faster. We can also adjust the nuance, X offset, Y offset, rotation, how much it rotates during the wiggle, and scale. All these options will change how the wiggle happens on our arrow. The best way to get to know these is to adjust them and play the video back until you get the perfect amount. You can also adjust the delay and how many times this loops. You can see a movement with wiggle, but it's not a sense of urgency. If you want a sense of urgency, the tremble behavior could be a good option. Tremble can be applied in the same way. Let's delete wiggle and drag on tremble. Just like wiggle, this only adds on an effect for during. Let's click on the during tab. We do not see as many options as we did with wiggle, but we still have options like horizontal, rotation, vertical, loop time, delay, and number of loops. Let's play it back to see what it looks like. You can see that this one portrays a better sense of urgency and panic. So I like that, but I'm going to increase the horizontal movement to get even more. Alright, I like that. I wouldn't make it too distracting, but enough to grab the viewer's attention. So that's how you apply the new wiggle and tremble behaviors inside of Camtasia. Let's go ahead and move on to the next video. Let's discuss how to speed up adding our animations using keyboard shortcuts. Picking up these shortcuts will save you a whole lot of time. The first thing we can do, as we've already discussed, is add your favorite animation to the shortcuts. If you find that you're using an animation or behavior a lot, hover over the animation and you'll see a star. Click on the star and it will add the animation or behavior to your favorites. Then go into your favorites tab and you'll see all of your favorite annotations, animations, behaviors, and anything else you use frequently. That way you don't have to spend time jumping between tabs and have all of your favorite things in one location. There is, however, a shortcut to adding custom animation on your timeline without even pulling up this area. Make sure you go to your timeline and have a screen recording on your timeline. Move your playhead where you want to add the animation, and then hit Shift and A. Shift A will add a custom animation to whatever piece of media that you have selected, leaving you on the second point so you can quickly go up and adjust the properties. So I can go up and scale the screen recording, pan it around, and more. Shift A is a quick and easy way to add custom animation to your timeline. Remember that with text animation, we are changing properties from one point to another point. If you need to match properties across all clips, you can copy and paste these. Let's say I zoom up on a screen recording, and I want the next clip to still be zoomed up with that same scale, X and Y values. You can right-click on the media that has the properties you want to copy, and then select Copy Properties from the menu, which will copy the properties for the location of your playhead. So make sure that it is at a point that you want to copy. Then go to the clip where you want these properties, and then right-click on that clip. Now select Paste Properties. That clip will have the same properties as the one that you copied. So any added zoom or movements will now reflect on this clip. That way, you can have two clips that look like they don't change, and your video will flow smoothly. This is especially helpful if you've already made some cuts in your video and you want to match up where one clip ends and the next one begins. Between adding custom animations quickly and copying and pasting properties, you can quickly adjust and animate any video that you're working with. Now let's dive into cursor effects. Camtasia will record your cursor during screen recordings, but that is not all. One of the most powerful things that Camtasia will do is allow us to edit your cursor even after you record. We'll dive more into editing the cursor on the recording in the next video, but let's explore how we can add cursor effects and create our own cursor path from scratch in this video. Let's start with the screen recording. Some of the effects will be similar to the ones that we've explored during the Camtasia Rev section. If we wanted to change the cursor color, we only have to click and drag the effect on the clip we wanted. Similar to the behaviors, it adds the effect in the bottom tray. Click on the arrow to see the effect. You can also see the properties of the effect on the right-hand side. One difference between cursor effects and behaviors is that we can adjust the effect's timing. At the beginning and end of the clips are handlebars. Click and drag the beginning and the end to isolate the time. You can see your cursor as a different color. Now if we drag our playhead back and forth, you can see the cursor will change colors as soon as it reaches a point where the effect starts. You can adjust the color, dark tone, intensity, and animation speed of how quickly it turns to that color, right within the properties on the right-hand side. I will only review some of the effects, but let's cover what's available. We can quickly add a drop shadow to help our cursor pop out more. We can even add a cursor spotlight or highlight to help draw attention to our cursor. That way the viewer's attention is drawn to them during the essential parts. If it's always there, it may lose some of its effect and not keep the viewer's attention. We can stack a bunch of these effects, and with each effect we can change the different properties like color, opacity, size, ease in and out, and softness. Play around with some of these effects and how they change the cursor. Let's add magnify to our cursor. Magnify adds a magnifying glass. Within the properties we can change the circle size, the amount it zooms in, the shadow behind it, and the softness around it. Magnify could help the viewer see what is behind your mouse better. All these properties get added to the cursor properties in your Camtasia properties panel. Notice though, the other properties that we can change. We can adjust the scale and the opacity of the cursor on the screen recording. Another section in the properties is the ability to edit the cursor path. We will come back to that in the following video. One thing you can do is smooth out the cursor movements. You may have your cursor moving around during the recordings. Adding this effect will eliminate unnecessary movements, smooth your cursor, and make the movements meaningful. We can adjust duration, delay, and ease of use to detect pauses and everything right within our properties. There's another way we can create these smooth paths, especially across clips. We will talk more about that in the next video. The last option I want to point out is the ability to highlight or emphasize right or left clicks on your mouse. Let's click on the left click tab. Drag one of the effects to your clip. I am also going to expand the effects tray here. This one looks a little different, and you'll notice dots along the timeline. Those dots are the times that your mouse clicks. I cannot edit those dots, but it is an excellent way to indicate where they are. I can add a clip sound if I want to, drag on that effect and play the video, and you'll hear a clicking sound during the video. You can add on the same thing with your right clicks. Camtasia gives you powerful options for enhancing your screen recordings and cursor. Let's continue learning to edit our cursor even more in the next video. One of the most powerful features of Camtasia is the ability to edit the cursor path even after you record. Editing the path gives you complete control to make your videos extremely polished. Let's cover what you need to know to get the most out of editing your cursor path. Select your recording on the timeline. Once that is selected, go into the properties. As we covered in the last section, it will show up on this tab anytime you add cursor effects. There are several things we can do even without these effects. We can adjust the scale and opacity like we learned about in the last video. We can also change our cursor. We can do this for the entire recording or these custom points in our path. Notice that when I'm on this tab, the timeline shows different points in the timeline. Let's zoom in on our timeline to see these more clearly. You can see that the cursor icon changes at different points. The cursor changing is typical on Windows and Mac. It changes when you do different things with your mouse. Move your cursor to the point in the recording that you want to change. You will notice the point's color change to indicate that is the current cursor. Go to the properties and select the drop-down box to see your cursor options. You can adjust the currently selected cursor, all similar looking cursors, or all the cursors in the selected clip. Let's explore the current one for now. The next option is to see the various types of cursors. We can see what was recorded and change it to one of those. Or we can select the drop-down box and select from different themes. The options are Windows, Mac, Custom, Hand-Drawn, and more. Notice how your options change based on what you have selected. Let's change the cursor to an hourglass. Because I only had the current one selected, it will just change the selected one. I could change all if needed. The other option we have is to hide the cursor. If we want to eliminate, we can select an option with the cursors crossed out. I'm going to switch it back to regular for now. I could load in my icon for a cursor, allowing me to create a customized cursor, or even something like an avatar with your name moving around your screen. Notice that it still follows the cursor path once I upload my own. If you want your cursor to be smooth across edits, ensure this stays checked. That could help fix any movement issues. But if you still want to get granular, click on Edit Cursor Path. Selecting this will bring up an alert if you want to simplify the existing path and edit that, or if you choose the drop-down box, you can start from scratch. Let's go ahead and start with a simplified existing path. You can now see a cursor path on the canvas and motion paths along the timeline. Either way you edit, you can adjust different points where your mouse moves. It could be somewhere it moves and stops for a second, or somewhere it moves to click on something. All of those are editable. These are keyframes, necessary steps, or movements in your cursor animation. I can click and drag any of these keyframes on the canvas to alter movement. When one of the keyframes is selected, you may notice additional handlebars on some of them. These handlebars allow us to adjust the curve and how the cursor moves. Clicking and dragging them out will create a longer curve. Moving them up and down will create a sharper angle. I could also move the keyframe if I want the cursor to move further on my screen. Let me click and drag one of these keyframes out. It will move both the handlebars and the keyframe. If I want to skip the cursor from moving to this location, I can hit the backspace button on Windows or delete on a Mac to remove that, and it will just jump to the next keyframe and not even move the old keyframe. That can help you clean up unwanted movements, which is most helpful when chatting. I move my mouse without even wanting to. Now I know I don't have to start from scratch and edit that distracting movement out. Editing along the canvas is one way to add keyframes. The other one is along the timeline. I can see various motion paths along the timeline. Motion paths are when they start to move from one point to another. In between motion paths, there is no movement, so we don't see connecting dots on those sections. Some of these motion paths will have only 2 points, but others may have more. Additional points means the cursor altered direction before it paused. I can either select the entire motion path or select just one of the points. You will notice a corresponding point highlighted in yellow when you select a point. Adjusting the cursor path on the timeline could be helpful when you want to change the timing of the motion paths. Let's say you want to speed up your movements from one point to another and make the points closer together. It will still move to the exact locations, just quicker. I can also edit the points. Let's find one with 3 points or more. Click on the middle point and hit backspace or delete. You can see that it's removed the middle point and we have the starting and ending points. You can also add points within the motion path. The easiest way to do this is to move your playhead between the 2 points and right-click on the motion path. Then select Add Cursor to the playhead. It has now created a new point on your timeline and canvas. You can edit either on your canvas or timeline. You can adjust the angle of the curve and the properties by selecting on the line type. Line type will either remove the curves and make it a straight angle, add an angle to one or the other side, or even add angles to both sides. You can add a cursor point on the canvas by right-clicking between 2 points and select Add Cursor Point. It will add a point between the 2 points, and you can now visually adjust them. Once you are done editing the points and adjusting the path, click on Finish Editing. The cursor path editor will disappear, and we can continue with other parts of our video. Editing the cursor path is a compelling way to fine-tune our screen recordings and get a polished, professional video that only moves the cursor intentionally. Now let's dive into working with transitions in the next video. Transitions allow us to add effects when we go from one clip to another clip. There are several different types of transitions that we can use within Camtasia. There are a lot to choose from, so I'm not going to cover all of them, but let's get to know some of the more common ones and explore some others. First, click on the Transitions tab on the left-hand side. Once we are in the tab, I can see all the various transitions I can use. At the top, we have a drop-down box to drill down to different types of transitions, like 3D, blurs, divisions, fades, radials, and more. You do not need to select a category. You can just keep it on all, and it will just show you all of them. If you're looking for a specific transition, you can simply type in the name of the transition in the search box. For example, I'm going to search for fade. When I type fade, it will show me all the various fades that I can choose from. If you want to clear the search, click on the X within the search field. To apply a transition, drag the transition from the window over to the clip you want this applied to. Notice that when I drag the transition onto the timeline, it highlights in yellow all the clips I could apply this transition to. If I drag a transition to the middle of the clip, it will apply a transition to the start and the end of that clip, and the end and start of the clip before and after the clip. As we zoom into the transitions, you can see a green rectangle that was added at the beginning and end of the clip. To adjust the transition, click and drag the handlebar either left or right to stretch out the length of the transition. It then helps to take your playhead and move it a little before the transition and hit play so you can see how the transition plays out and see if you need to adjust the timing of the transition. Transitions between clips usually need to have a transition at the end of the previous clip and a transition at the beginning of the new clip to make it look smooth. If you select the drop-down box, you can see all of the optional transitions in the categories here. This menu allows you to change the transition without having to adjust the timing of your transition. You can even select the option to use trimmed content if needed. What that means is if there's trimmed content in a clip like this, it may use some of the trimmed content to help with the transition. You can disable that if needed. You can also decide to reverse the transition for a different type of effect by selecting reverse. On some transitions, you may have the option to flip horizontally. This is found on options like arrow transitions. Adjusting that will change the direction of the arrow that animates across. If you want to adjust properties for more than one transition, hold down the Shift button and select all of the transitions you want to affect, and then go to the properties and adjust the properties for all transitions. Another option to add transitions is to select the clip you want to add a transition to, then use the shortcut Shift-T. This will add the most recently used transition to the clip. Different transitions may have different properties to adjust. Take some time and try applying various transitions to your video to see how they play out. Be careful not to go overboard with too many transition types. Let's wrap up what we've learned about in this section and move on to the next module. Welcome to this in-action video where we take the things that we've been learning about in this section in previous sections and put them all together. So I'm going to go ahead and create an animated intro. I'm going to start from a new project here. And let's go ahead and save this project as the animated intro project. I'm going to save this to my desktop. Then I'm going to add several different things onto this project. So the first thing is I'm going to add an annotation. So under the annotations tab, let's go ahead and select on the shapes here. And let's drag out a rectangle. And I'm going to adjust it so it fills the entire screen. Now download the file, which is the icon.png file that you can download with this video. And we're going to use that to animate in our object. But I'm going to fill this in as a background. So I'm going to select this drop down and then adjust it to be kind of a bluish color, maybe a darker blue. And to me, that looks good there. So I'm going to stretch this out to about 10 seconds, and we're going to have this animate in. So I'll drag this to the starting point, which is off the stage. Then I'll add a custom animation, and you can zoom in here. And then you can do Shift-A to add that custom animation. I'm on point B here, so let's go ahead and just adjust where the ending point is going to be. And that'll fill the entire stage. So you can see that kind of animates in. Now to add an effect, let's go ahead and right-click on this. Do Enable Easing. And let's select Exponential In and Out so it kind of slows down as it gets to the end here. And then I'm going to hit play just to make sure that that is looking good. Everything is looking good there, so let's go ahead and just drag on another square. And we're going to create this cool kind of effect as the square starts to animate in, and then eventually we're going to animate in our logo. I want this to be a perfect square, so I'm going to go into my shapes properties. Making sure that this is not locked, I'll adjust this to be 450 by 450. So it's kind of that perfect square. Now I'm going to adjust the rotation to be about 45. So you can see that it looks more like a diamond shape at this point. Now when you're animating, you take these step by step. So I'm going to animate this to come in, and then I'll animate another one that has a masking effect. So let's go ahead and just bring this in a little bit, our playhead in a little bit, and then hit Shift A to add on another custom animation. This is where it's going to end up being. Let's go to point A. I'm just going to adjust the scale down, and you can see that I can't exactly get to 0 for some reason. It's going to stay at 1, but we can adjust the opacity to kind of fix that later, and that's fine. You can see that it will animate in there. Let's right click on this and also make sure that it is exponential in and out, so it kind of has that slowing down at the beginning and slowing down at the end as well. Now we do want the animation to take the entire length here. So I'm going to just stretch that out to be the entire length of that clip. We may need to adjust it a little bit, but let's just go ahead and keep it like that for now. And I'm also going to create another effect that's going to do the same animation, but we're going to create a mask. So I'll right click on this and do copy. Then right click again and do paste. Let's drag this above, which will automatically create a new track. And you can see that as I start to bring my playhead in, the first one will come in, but then the second one is going to come in like right after it, which is good. But in order to create this kind of cutout effect, I may need to adjust the timeline a little bit. And I may need to stretch out the bottom one a little bit just so it stays on the screen, and you'll see why here in a second. Now to create the track matte, you right click on the eyeball, and we're going to select alpha invert. Notice how wherever that shape is, it's actually going to create a cutout of that shape. Now as I start to move my playhead, you can see that the first rectangle will come in, but then the second rectangle comes in right after it and kind of gets rid of that entire effect. If I had it like this, you can see that it kind of just disappears at the end. I want to keep that square in until this one is done animating. But I want several of these to happen all at one time. So what I can do is select both of these shapes and right click and then select group. Now inside of the group, if I click on expand the group, it does keep that track matte. But what I'll need to do is actually remove it from this one. So I'll just right click and then do track matte none. Just make sure that it's still within that group. Yes, it is. So we're good there. And now I can just go ahead and copy and paste this a couple of times and time it out a little bit. And you'll see as I hit play how the shapes just start to come in one after the other. And I can stack this as much as I want and have these go as much as I want too. So at the end, what I want to do is have my icon come in as a square as well. So I'm going to go into my media, select on import media here, and select my icon and then click open. This will insert it as a PNG, and then I can go ahead and stack this on top of the other ones. Okay, so let's make sure that this is the same size. So I'm going to just make sure that it's 450 by 450, and then the rotation is set at 45 degrees. So let's go ahead and select this and do a Shift A, and then we're going to go to point A and make sure that scale is down. And let's actually adjust the opacity so it's down too. So as it starts to come up, you'll notice the opacity comes in, but we also want to rotate it. So I'm going to just take this back to 0 with the Z rotation. And we're going to have this kind of bounce in, kind of rotate in, and I'll adjust the timing here in a second. We can stretch that out. But what I also want to do is have this bounce a little bit. So I'll right click on this, go to enable easing, and instead of bounce, which is very drastic, I'm going to do spring. So now you can see there's a little bounce at the end, kind of goes past it and then comes up. Now let's just get the timing. So I want it to come in right about there. So now let's hit play from the beginning. And you can see that little diamond is still there, even with the square, which I think is pretty awesome. Let's also have it fade out a little bit. So I'm going to do Shift A. Let's stretch this out a little bit. Do a Shift A. And then just change the opacity down to 0. Let's make sure that this times up perfectly here. with our blue background. Let's actually have that fade out a little before the blue background is done. The opacity didn't quite get to 0, so I'm going to adjust it to 0. Or we can even have it animate out and bounce back as needed. But I think that's good enough for now. So let's go ahead and select all of our objects. And we're going to group this. And so let's go into the group and then name it with the tab here, animated intro. Now I'm going to go out of the group by selecting the X. Now what I can do is right click on this and go to add to library. You can see that it already has the animated intro. Let's go ahead and save this to our default library, use the canvas size, and then click OK. Now what we can do is add that animated intro to any new project. So let's go ahead and save this just so we have the source files. And now we're inside of a new project. I can go into my library. There is my animated intro. I can slap that at the very beginning. And you can see we have the animated intro that we can reuse over and over. Feel free to slap on your own icon, make some adjustments as needed, but that's how you go through and create one of these animated intros.
So this section was all about animations, which will really take you to the next level. Being able to animate shapes and even zoom in on different portions of your screen recording and pan around and zoom back out to help focus the viewer's attention. We learned about that. We learned about animation basics, being able to change properties. And really what animation is changing properties of one object at one point of the timeline to another point of the timeline. So point A and point B, we talked about that. We also talked about some of the out-of-the-box animations that you get with Camtasia, or even the ability to zoom in and pan around your screen. We also talked about behaviors and how really they take your text animations to a whole nother level and being able to animate each letter at a time inside of your text. I then showed you some shortcuts on how you could save time when you're adding animations to your timeline, and then even cursor effects to be able to draw the learner's attention to the cursor, or being able to edit the pathway of the cursor as well. And then finally, we wrapped up with transitions. So we covered a lot in this section. I really designed this course to be able to jump to different portions without having to go through all of the different videos. So if you need to go back and watch, oh, how do I do the cursor path editing? You could just jump right to that. So you'll be using that a lot. But I do want to talk about in the next section, different visual effects that we can apply to our live video, but also to our screen recording as well. So let's go ahead and dive into that next.